Okay.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the session on negotiation strategies. This is Swapnil Kamat with a new haircut. I hope you recognize me. Arunima, do you like my new haircut?
I do. This is Arunima with the same haircut. So
Arunima with the same. Finally, I decided to do. I thought I'd make most of COVID and get a haircut that was a little more bold, and I'm very happy that my wife thinks it's a good haircut. So I'm happy about that, and so do most other people, I think. So anyway, welcome to this session on negotiation strategies. As with all sessions, this is an interesting session. That said, the topic of negotiation skills is a very very wide topic, and I can't be telling you that we can do justice to this topic in a span of 1.5 hours and probably one 90-minute coaching session that you have. This subject is way bigger than that. However, what we've tried to do is we've tried to throw light through this session on a few key strategies, a few key techniques, a few key tactics that you can use while you are conducting negotiations that could help you out, right? So, because as a communicator in business, very often you are going to be in situations where you need to negotiate. So, how do you communicate well in those situations is what this session is about. So please don't think that this is an all-encompassing session that includes everything. No, it just includes certain key ideas. And if you're inquisitive about this and want to know more about this, I'm sure Arunima is going to provide a lot of interesting material in our learning resources that can really help you out in understanding this topic better. Okay, so let's dive right into it. What is negotiation? Negotiation is the act of reaching an agreement, of finding a mutually acceptable solution to a shared problem, right? That's what negotiation is, the act of reaching an agreement. For me, I think a key, let me get to the second point and then I'll share a key kind of trigger in my brain that helped me understand this topic much better. The parties involved may have different objectives and interests. They communicate back and forth with the aim of finding a win win solution. So, for me, the minute I understood that negotiations were all about creating a win-win solutions where both parties feel like they have received something of value, the way I started doing negotiations started changing. The way I understood the topic, the way I could teach that topic, everything changed the minute I realized that negotiations is about creating win-win. Why is that? Because um, before I understood this topic, I always thought negotiation was about win lose, right? That's the way it's often position to us, that okay, this person won the negotiation and this person lost the negotiation. Very often negotiations are positioned as lose lose, right? What does lose lose means? Where both people kind of walk off the table, and no deal happens, or they don't reach any middle ground. So either one party wins, the other person feels like a loser, or both people lose, often because of their egos, that they don't negotiate situations very well because their egos. And what you need to try to create in a negotiation is a win win situation where both parties feel like they've, of course, won, and both parties feel like they've got something of value from that particular negotiation, right? And until that happens, until you realize that negotiations are about a win win situation, you are never going to get good at it. Negotiations are not about winning over somebody else, it's about creating win win for both, right? So that was a big thing in my mind. And the minute I overcame that, I started negotiating with people a lot better, right? We are negotiating all the time. We're negotiating with our vendors, our boss, our customers, our peers, our spouses, friends, children, etc. Right. So the process of negotiations is, in a way, an ongoing process for us. Right now, understanding negotiations, negotiations that aim for mutually satisfying outcomes are often the best. These are called collaborative negotiations, right? So that's exactly what we discuss. Mutually satisfying outcomes is what is important. The technique used to conduct these help negotiators find a solution that shows high concern for the needs of both sides, right? because unless it shows high concern for both sides, that's not a very, very good negotiation. This result is win-win rather than a one side giving up a position. The focus is on finding a solution where everyone is happy. And if you actually think of it this way, you'll start doing them way better. Arunima has appeared on the screen much sooner than expected. So I've either not said something well, she wants to add something, or she has a question. Arunima, what is it?
So when you do research on negotiation skills
Yeah.
or you
Yeah.
try to train yourself, someone's training your
Yes.
negotiation,
Yeah.
one of the first things they start with is, like you said, the idea of win-win. So
Mm.
there's a concept called don't assume a fixed pie.
Yeah.
Okay. So this essentially means, let's take a hypothetical situation where two people are sort of negotiating over a
Mm.
slice of pizza.
Yeah.
A pizza is also called a
Yeah.
pie.
Yeah.
And the assumption is that they both are kind of fighting with each other, negotiating with each other for the bigger piece or the
Yeah.
entire pizza.
Yeah.
All right. So this assumption basically says that we have a bias,
Yeah.
that the other party's interests are
Yeah.
directly in conflict with ours.
Mm.
And that's a bias we always start out with whenever
Mm.
we are in a conflict or when we're negotiating, that
Mm.
their interests are obviously going to be opposing to mine, so I have to
Correct.
fight it.
Correct.
However, this pizza example, this shows that when they actually started talking to each other,
Yeah.
we realized that one person just wanted the middle piece with the actual toppings,
Yeah.
and one person wanted the crust to make croutons out of it.
Correct.
So they were able to divide that pie between the two of them and satisfy
Correct.
both, because they had different needs, different objectives, different interests, but they
Very
were
good.
able to find a solution to it through that conversation. So
Yeah.
when you start negotiating, the first
Yeah.
thing you need to realize is that the other person's not fighting against you. It's
Yeah.
possible that you may have, of course, the same sort of interests and needs, or you may even have different ones, but they're not necessarily opposing each other.
Beautiful. I think you've put it across beautifully, right? You could have different, but they don't need to be opposing. I think
Correct.
that's the thing, and that's the point also I was trying to make earlier, Rudima, that I earlier, before I actually learned about the subject of negotiation, I would always go in it saying, have I won the negotiation? Did I have the upper hand on it? And especially, like the next slide is going to show us, when you have long-term relationships with people and you have recurring negotiations with people, trying to get the upper hand in it all the time is not going to work, because you will end up
Correct.
damaging the relationship. um, and maybe when you're doing, is that the next slide? Yeah, it is the next slide,
Yes.
right, that we're talking about. So just stay on the screen, Arunima, so we can discuss this further. So you have two broad type of association negotiations, and I'm sure there are more than two types, right? But broadly, if we have to divide them, there's a one-time negotiation that you have, where you're basically interacting with that person possibly once in your entire life, right? Or probably once in 5 years or 10 years, right? So it's not a frequent interaction that you have with the person. You're not doing business with that person frequently. For example, if you buy a car, right? If you go to a car salesman, you want to get the best deal there. Right, you want to get the best deal there because you're not going to speak to that person again. You don't really care that much about the relationship with that car salesman or the car dealership, right? You may care about it a little if they're your service center as well, but you don't care about it that much. However, most negotiations that we end up having is with our recurring negotiations, right? When long-term relationships are involved. So when you talk about negotiating with your spouse or your children or your boss or your clients or your vendors, in all these negotiations, you may win the battle but lose the war. Is that the right way to put it?
Correct.
Right, you may win the
Correct.
battle but lose the war. You may win the short term but lose the long term if you don't balance those interests off, right? Now, I just wanted to add another point to what you said earlier about the pizza. We've done exercises like this exactly where the same thing, right? Even when we've been in classrooms and we've done exercises like this, you realize that people end up often fighting about that pie, and then the insight that they get is something like you just shared, that, oh, if we actually had a conversation and didn't get confrontational with each other as people get during negotiations,
Correct.
we would have come to a mutually beneficial win-win situation, right? If we just
Correct.
conducted ourselves and knew that that was the objective right from the start, right? So that's
Correct.
something which is a very, very important point, and that'll be a game changer in your mind if you start thinking about negotiations like that, right? And truth be told, Arunima, I think even the negotiations that parents do with children, they don't often involve money, but they're so interesting, and a lot of the principles that you will see here are can be used there. Even when you're negotiating with your child, try to not make it a win-lose situation where you have the
Correct.
upper hand on it, because the recurring negotiation that you're going to have, right? That you have the
Correct.
you won this negotiation or they won it. Try to look for a win-win in whatever way, and the more you work on that principle, even with a child, the more robust your relationship will be. The more, I guess, there'll be overall peace and shanti in the house, if that is the case, right? Otherwise we know how it can go.
So I wanted to share another interesting sort of thing I came across while I was
Yeah,
researching.
yeah.
Uh, I can't remember the name of the book. If I do find it, I'll share it with our coaches as well. What this person talks about is often a lot of our interactions, especially conflict type interactions or negotiating interactions, where again where you're kind of trying to when you may be on opposing sides, we directly equate these kind of interactions with sports, like our learnings from sports. In sports, more often than not, there's always a winner and a loser, right? You
Yeah,
don't, at least the common sports that you can think of, you always have one team which is winning, one team which is losing.
yeah.
And because they're opposing each other, we directly, subconsciously, unconsciously relate that with our interactions, our communication with other people.
Beautiful.
Because of which, again, we have this bias that, oh, I have to win this interaction, I have to win this conversation, I
Yeah,
need to win this negotiation.
yeah.
And we need to actively put that thought aside,
Correct.
especially when it comes to negotiations which involve long-term relationships.
Yeah,
You need to put that thought aside that, okay, there's not going to be a winner or a loser, and we talk
yeah,
about that in the next slide.
yeah.
It's not a competition. It's for us to find a solution which is going to satisfy both of us. It's not completely, partially at least, so that both of us walk away feeling happy from this
Yeah, yeah,
conversation.
yeah. And I can tell you, Arunima, as a CEO of a company, and I've been running this company for a while. Um, you know that often every time somebody's gotten into a negotiation with me, with the mentality of winning that negotiation over me, it's led often to neither of us winning, right?
Correct.
And I think earlier on I probably didn't have the maturity to recognize this. And the other thing that would happen, anybody that took that aggressive stand, especially in recurring negotiations where it just felt that they wanted to win this discussion, and very often consciously or subconsciously, what would end up happening in my head was I would be like, okay, I will let you win this battle, but I'll keep this in
I'll
mind
remember
when it
it.
comes to the war, right?
Correct.
And that would be the mentality. And often, then what would happen is, in some way or the other, it wouldn't be a long-term win-win for both of us, right? Because the
Yeah.
person took, in a way, an approach of a sports-like approach of saying, "I need to win this time," rather than an approach which is more holistic, more win-win in
Correct.
nature. So it's damn interesting. Thank you for sharing the insight, Arima. You've done a lot of research on this subject. I hope you come on screen more often. I'm sure the coaches are tired of my face, and they'll love to see your face more often. Okay,
I
now
will.
what negotiation is not. Okay, we just discussed this. Not a competition where one party loses or other wins. Not a confrontation, not an argument, not a shouting match, right? So negotiation is none of these things. Now, what is the importance of negotiation skills? It helps you convince other people and get their buy-in. If you're good at negotiating, it encourages others to see things from your point of view. It helps you achieve important goals, if you're good at negotiating, and allows you to build, maintain, improve important workplace relationships, right? So, actually, the more negotiations are important at all point of time in in your career and your life, but especially the more senior you go, and the more kind of jobs you do of top management, just about everything boils down to the topics of negotiation and influence, right? You have to do that in just about every situation. Now, what are some of the attitudes of successful negotiators us against the problem instead of you against me. That's such a beautiful way of putting it, right? Us against the problem instead of you against me. The win-win we spoke about. They separate people from the problem. They don't attack the other person. Instead, they attack the problem at hand, right? And find a win-win. Their egos don't get in the way of a win-win solution. Successful negotiators are always prepared, which doesn't mean that they're always prepared to get into a negotiation. They're always prepared if there's an important discussion. They don't just come without the requisite knowledge and the requisite background, and they're very clear on their objectives before they come in. So that's them being always prepared. They're willing to listen and have an open mind. I can't tell you how important this point is, and as we go along we'll kind of share more about that, because a lot of times when you step into a negotiation, while you may be clear on what your objectives are, on what your goals are, at all points of time you need to have an open mind, because there is a possibility that the other person may put something on the table that you haven't thought of, which may change your somewhat rigid position, or which may change your the original objective that you entered that conversation with, right? So you can't say, oh, this is what I decided I want and I'm going to only walk out with this, because you don't know what the person on the other side is going to put on the table. So you need to be prepared, but you also need to have an open mind, right? Your ability to do both these things simultaneously is a sign of first class intelligence for you. You need to have confidence in their abilities, allowing them to communicate assertively. This is something which is very important. And they have excellent self control and temperament, right? I often fail in this category when it comes to negotiation. I'm a very impatient negotiator. That's something that I don't like about myself, because very often I find that I'm losing too much of time, and I value that time more, and I sometimes screw up on the negotiation. So that's what I need to take a lot of care on when I am negotiating with people, right? But yeah, you need to have emotional regulation when you're negotiating. You need to be a patient person. You need to be cool, calm, and collected. You need to have that right temperament if you want to do it well. Right now, a quick exercise for you, this way you pause the video and kind of make your notes before we get into the rest of the topic. Think of two people you know, one from your personal and one from your professional life, who's a great negotiator, right? I'm sure you know people from your personal side as well that are really good. What makes them great at negotiating? Highlight any three characteristics or behaviors that they demonstrate, right? So three from your personal life, three from your professional life. Pause the video here. You need to take these answers back to your coach and have a quick discussion on them as to what are those attributes that you've seen. Right now, before we go to the rest of the topics, like I said, negotiation is a very, very broad subject in itself. However, a lot of these things that we've already done classes or have classes on are very important for you to attend and go through the coaching of each one of these things for you to be able to negotiate well, right? So if you want to be a good negotiator, you need to have the ability to structure your thoughts well. So our class on McKenzie becomes very, very important. McKenzie pyramid model becomes very, very important for you here. If you want to negotiate well, it's important because body language plays such a big role while you're negotiating with somebody. Your body language, your tone of voice also will play a very, very important role, which is you're speaking with impact and command. So this is one class that I hope you'll have already attended and remember, because that when you're negotiating, you have to have a tone of confidence. When you're negotiating, you have to have confidence, self belief. You need to have a certain amount of energy when you're negotiating if you have to do it well. So these things become important. You also need to know how to do active listening and asking questions. You need to build rapport, which we'll look at later. You need to be good at conversational skills with people, right? If you want to build rapport with them. The topics of negotiation and influencing often go together, right? They're like brothers and sisters, right? That go together. We've of course have an entire amazing class on the 6 principles of influence that you must go through for you to also become a good negotiator. And of course, we've done assertive communication, which is another important class for you to attend, right? So these are just some of the classes that will combine well with the topic of negotiation for you to be able to do it well. And I hope you've attended them. I hope you've chosen those topics, right? Now we've divided this whole process. Actually, we haven't. This is the way most kind of the most people who are experts on this subject divide it into these 4 or 5 broad parts, right? So the first part is, of course, how do you go about preparing? The second part is how do you go about opening the discussion? The third part is how do you go about bargaining? And the fourth one is how do you agree and close, right? So these are the four, and we're going to share not everything, but at least the main strategies and tactics connected to these things, right? So let's look at number one, which is preparing for it. Okay. Now, if you want to be a good negotiator, go into the negotiation knowing what you want. Okay. Determine what your main objective is. Be clear on the outcome you want from the negotiation, right? I think one of the things that we have seen, whether you want to be a good communicator, we spoke about, if you want to be a good communicator, you need to be clear on the objective that you have. That means, what do you wish to achieve at the end of the communication? The same thing applies when you're negotiating, right? You need to be crystal clear, at least as a starting position, on what is it that you want at the end of that negotiation, right? Unless you're clear about that final outcome. And you need to, in a way, I'm a big believer of writing, because writing basically concretizes your thoughts and helps you think better. So if you're getting into an important negotiation, really try to think and write down what is the final outcome that you want, right, from that negotiation. And once you can write it down, you will get clarity yourself, which will help you do this thing better, right? Yeah. So that's the number one thing. Identify your must and wants, right? What are your musts and what are your wants? For example, I cannot spend over 20,000 over a new phone is a must, whereas I don't really want a Nokia suggests that you take one if the deal is right. Okay, so identify, when you're saying what's your main outcome, identify what are your musts that you can't really move from, and what are your wants, right? If you have multiple goals during that discussion you want to achieve, ensure that you prioritize them so that you know what is most important to you in that thing, and that becomes very important. Now I just want to add something here, right? Like I said, be clear on what your musts are, be clear on what your wants are, but at all points of time it's important to have an open mind towards it, right? Because sometimes you may say that 20,000 rupees is my upper limit for something, and the person at the shop may give you an excellent phone that you're in love with, that you're going to use for the next 3 years, and it's for 22,000 rupees, but he's also given you a great EMI option without interest that you couldn't predict before you got into the shop, right? You didn't know that he could give you that. So while you must go in with certain musts and certain wants, right, you need to always have an open mind and be very, in a way, flexible while negotiating for you to reach a win-win, right? Otherwise, if you say no, no, I said 20,000 bucks, I'm not going to move up, and so many people are so rigid with their thinking when it comes to this, right? They almost have an ego problem with themselves. They say, no, I decided this, I have to get this, and they let go of a brilliant offer at 22,000 with the EMI, which is interest free, because it went against their own objective and must. So don't do that when it comes to negotiating, right? Be prepared on what you want, but that open mind is extremely important, because that leads to the flexibility that can head to win-win for you, right? And even a negotiation as simple as buying a phone, you can create a lose for yourself, right? A lose-lose situation where the guy from the shop gave you an amazing deal, but because you were rigid about it and didn't have an open mind about it, you walked out. So you lost, you didn't get that good deal. He lost because he didn't get the business. And both of y'all could have won if y'all had an open mind towards it, right? Yes, Arunima, come in.
So I just wanted to add one thing. The idea behind having a must and a want, and this is how I understood it, is it helps you be clear on what are your limitations or what you're willing to compromise on. So I think that
Yeah.
word compromise is very important.
Yeah.
So when you walk in, and because you are bound to bargain with the person, they will ask for something, you
Yeah.
might have to let go of for certain things. So if you're not clear right at the beginning before you even go into negotiation,
Yeah,
at that point you won't really know how to make a decision. So
absolutely.
being very clear about what are things that you are okay letting go or what are things you're okay compromising on
Yeah,
really helps with your decision making then during the negotiation.
I think
So that's something, yeah, to keep in
that's a
mind.
brilliant point. Okay, and I'm glad you're chiming in because I know how much research you've done on this thing, right? So yeah, so I think that's very important. Just and I'm sure you'd agree with my point of saying that
Yes,
while you must have your must and want, it's also important to have an open mind, because without that
correct.
you can't do a win-win without that, right? Now, once you know the outcome you want, prepare supporting points to meet your objectives. Explore the different options that you might use to get what you want, right? So that's what you need to do. Explore different options that you might use to get what you want, right? Now, this becomes very important. Okay, now um, as a as a company, when we hire people, often we need to negotiate around salaries, right, from a company standpoint of view, and from the other side they need to negotiate on or the prospective team member or employee needs to negotiate on the best possible outcome for them, and we need to try to negotiate for the best possible outcome for us and them to create a win-win, right? And what this means, again, in the context of an organization and a prospective employee is, at some point of time you may be able to squeeze that potential employee, and you may be able to drive a better bargain and get him to possibly come at a salary that he doesn't want, but that's not creating win-win. You may have won the battle, but you're going to lose the war, because when he comes on board he's not going to be that happy about what he's got, right? So just winning on that one parameter is not going to do well. But if you come in and if you have, if the say the prospective company has wants walks into that particular deal saying that my must is I must close this person at 1,000 rupees of remuneration in a year, and that person possibly wants a rupees 1,500 remuneration a month. Now you know that you can't go above this, he doesn't want to come below this, right? So if you get stuck on this particular discussion, you're not going to be able to create a win-win. Okay, and this is what this point means of explore different options that you might use to get what you want, right? So you want this person to come on board. Now what are the other levers that you can pull? What are the other things that you can do if you really can't move past this $1,000 and can't come close to the 1,500 that he's looking for? What is it that you can offer to that person? Because otherwise if you just get stuck here, you're not going to be able to kind of win the not be able to reach a win-win with that person, right? So that becomes very, very important for you. Okay, now while Varunima and myself were building this content, I probably said this to her at least 3 to 5 times. I said, if anybody wants to be a good negotiator, I think the single most important thing that they need to know, even more than the first point that I stated, is Batna, right? And the minute they understand what Batna means is in my opinion, the single most important thing, because the way you negotiate totally changes based on Batna, right? And however much you say otherwise, it doesn't work in practicality. Batna is best alternative to negotiated agreement. Having a Batna means having alternatives available in case there is no deal where you are, right? So Batna basically means what are your alternatives, in a way, what is your plan B if that doesn't work? And having a lot of sometimes plan B's, plan C's, help you negotiate better with a person, right? Then you can look at this with from any point of view. If I'm a company owner and I want to sell a stake in my company, and if I want to sell a stake in my company, and of course I desperately want to sell it because I want to raise money for some reason, and if I only have one option, I only have option A with me. The way, if I have only one option, the way I'd go about negotiating with that one option, somewhere or the other, I'm going to be on the back foot, right? If I have only one party at the table, right? However, if I have three parties that I'm simultaneously negotiating with, right, and I have in a way offers from this person and offers from this person as well, then the way I go about negotiating with A is with a lot more confidence. I can go about negotiating with him, right? And in a way, when you're negotiating, it's very difficult for us to fake that confidence if you really want a deal to happen, if you really want this stake to be sold. Right now, I'm just going to quickly I want to explain Batna to you in a little more detail because I think this is very important in every situation. Right? So if I'm a sales guy, okay, if I'm a sales guy and I have a target of rupees 1,000, okay, that's my say monthly target that I have. Okay, now when I go to my customer and if I have to negotiate with him, I am going to negotiate well with my customer if I know that my pipeline is rupees 3,000, right? And I possibly know that of my pipeline, typically I have a 50% conversion, right? That 50% conversion is what I get. So if I have a pipeline of 3,000 rupees, so I have deals worth 3,000 rupees on my monthly target, and I know 50% is my conversion, then the way I will go about negotiating with a particular customer with will be with a lot more confidence, because if he asks me for some ridiculous price or he asks me for a ridiculous term, it's much easier for me to say no to him if I know that I have a pipeline of 3,000 and I am going to get 50% conversion, which will lead to me surpassing or doing 50% better than the target that I have. That brings me the confidence to negotiate with somebody much better, right? So even as a salesperson, negotiating with your customers is the same thing. Now, that's what the Google era is brought upon us, right? What happens with Google is that it's so easy for each one of us to find multiple options for what we need. So when we're dealing with large businesses, if they want to give a piece of business to someone, they will often call four vendors, or they have a minimum thing of calling three vendors, but they'll call four vendors. And after they call four vendors, each vendor is always feeling that, oh, there are three other people that I'm comparing with. So this business, because of it's so easy to get those alternatives today, has multiple alternatives, right? And therefore today each one of them can squeeze us on prices and squeeze us on terms far more than they probably do it earlier, right? Now, unless you have some product which is that's why you need to have some product that is really special, or a service that is really special, or you've built a brand or reputation that none of the others have. So that's your only way of, in a way, fighting this thing. But it's become so much more easier for businesses to do Batna, because you can always bring four people on the table and negotiate with them, and if there's hardly any difference, you can give the deal to one person, right? While you are doing your appraisal, for that matter, right, when you're doing your appraisal, now you are negotiating with your company as well, and the company is negotiating with you. So if your company knows that you are easily dispensable, right? What does easily dispensable means? That it's easy to find an alternative to you. um, they have the upper hand in that discussion. However, if you've created so much of value for yourself within the company where you're indispensable, it's very difficult for the company to find an alternative for you, right? And the minute that is the case, you are in a much better position to negotiate with the company because of the value that you created for them, right? And in the same way, when you're negotiating, say, for a job offer or during the appraisals, if you are a highly capable performer that like literally overperforms all the time, you are going to be valuable in the market at large. If not in this company, you're going to be valuable somewhere else, right? And when you have that kind of confidence, the way you'd go about doing your possibly the job interviews or doing your appraisal meetings with your company will be totally different. So no amount of us training you on negotiation skills is going to help if you don't have Batna, right? If you don't have alternatives, if you don't have a plan B, plan C towards stuff. And this could be as simple as a if you go to a fruit vendor, right, in Bombay, and if you have tons of fruit vendors lined up selling more or less the same thing, if one guy kind of gives you a certain price, it's much easier for you to at least threaten that you'll go to the other two shops, right? Because there are alternatives that are right there. So he can't raise his price beyond the point. He has to work in that category because he knows that you have alternatives there, right? If you're the only fruit shop there and there are no fruit shops in that area, like total area, he has in a way a monopoly over that. So then he starts increasing his prices. He'll say no home delivery, or if I do home delivery, I will charge you for it. So then he starts dominating that negotiation because you don't have an alternative, right? Fortunately, in the modern world, what's happened for customers is there are just so many alternatives, and that's why each and every business is on their toes in a way, right? Because there are so many alternatives. But in every situation, if you're a sales guy, create that pipeline of 3,000 rupees, right? So you can negotiate better. If you are a team member or an employee of a certain company, ensure that you're creating so much of value within that company that you become indispensable. Ensure that you're performing so well that you become valuable to the marketplace, where it's difficult to find an alternative to you, right? If you are a company, if there is a person that is dispensable, you of course have the upper hand. If you have a business and if you want to negotiate with your vendors, try to negotiate with more than one vendors, right? Because that will put all of them on the back foot because they have a partner which is there, right? So this is, I think, the most important thing when you are negotiating, right? And Arunima and myself, I don't want to have those discussions on this forum because this is strictly business discussion. But we said even in our personal lives, right? If you are groom hunting or your wife hunting, if you're on looking for a prospective partner, I think having alternatives gives you a much more confidence than not having any alternatives, right? Then you can choose. Now you may not want to choose. Sometimes that's another thing. Yes, Arunima, you've come. Do you want to add to the prospective partner part
No, but I thought we can explore another sort of
dimension?
non-professional
Yes,
dimension of it is
yes,
even when you're out shopping,
yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
it's the exact same thing. Often when you go into a store to buy what, let's say, a pair of jeans, and you go into a Levi's store to buy a pair of jeans and you don't find what you want. I mean, earlier it would be like, okay, I know that I'm not going to find anything else really, so I'm going to buy another pair, which, because I'm here at the store, so might as well. Now I
yeah,
know that, just two stores down the line, there'd be another store
yeah,
which has similar sort of collection or just a
yeah,
different brand. So
yeah,
there are so many possibilities and alternatives available to me as a
yeah,
consumer. I'm never
yeah.
bound, like I'm never limited to just one place, unless they're of course catering to a very niche
Correct,
product.
correct.
So it even applies to us, in that manner,
Yeah,
where we are kind of out shopping. So it's a very
absolutely.
important
It
concept to keep
applies.
in mind.
Absolutely, it applies everywhere. And my
Correct.
literally my number one tip to people is, if you want to get good at negotiation, you need to have partner in your situation.
Correct.
Whatever it is, you need to have alternatives, because the minute that's the case, you are going to deal with situations totally differently than if you don't have partner, right? You will always be scared while negotiating, while doing anything, if that is the case. Yes, sir.
And I can't recollect if you already
Yeah,
mentioned this. You must have that.
yeah,
What would also happen if you don't have alternatives, you'll end up taking a really poor deal
yeah,
because
yeah,
you know that, you know what, I just have to kind of, this is the only option I have available. I
correct,
if either I take this deal or I end up with nothing at all.
correct.
So you'll end up probably taking a really really bad deal, which it would not have been the case if you had a partner.
Yeah, absolutely. And that bad deal could be anything, right? The bad deal could sometimes be a higher price on an item
Yeah,
at the Levi's
yeah,
store. It could be
correct,
sometimes a low salary for a job offer or an appraisal, right? If somebody's selling their
correct.
company stake and they don't have option, they just saddled with one option for whatever reason, they'll end up selling their stake at a much lower
At
rate,
a very,
right? So
yeah.
that's what they're going to do. So that's in a way the key to it, right? Because you can't fool around beyond a point. If you don't have partner, right, you can't fool around. Okay, so this is my number one tip. I hope you all take that. I hope you all like that one. um BATNA gives you leverage in a negotiation. Your ability and willingness to walk away and take another deal becomes your negotiating chip. The better your partner, the more aggressive you can be in your negotiation, since you have a good alternative available, right? Now, this is the other thing that we know, which is set a walkaway price as well. Your walkaway price terms is the least attractive deal before you cease negotiations. For example, the highest price a buyer is willing to pay, or the lowest price a seller is willing to take, right? So have in mind, when it comes to the price component, like we discussed previously, what is the highest or what is the lowest that you're willing to go for? And that is something that's really going to help you. And at all points of time, like we said, the open mind is important when it comes to these discussions, right? Now, we already discussed this. Let's go to the next slide, which is plan all aspects of the negotiation. Apart from knowing your own goals, also try to predict what your stakeholder might want as an outcome from the negotiation and estimate their priorities. You're not going to get this perfectly right, but as a part of doing strategic thinking, as a part of doing holistic thinking around this topic, you want to think of, okay, what could be some of the goals the other party may have when it comes to this thing, right? What may he want to do? And you're definitely not going to be able to predict all of them, but that really helps. Identify all possible point issues that might arise during the negotiation and determine how you will handle them. For example, price, transportation cost, quality. So whatever the parameters that you think are going to come up during those discussions, if you're going to do an important discussion well, you need to know in advance as to how you're going to respond to each one of them. If you don't know that, if you're not going to do that thorough thinking, you're not going to be able to do a good negotiation, right? And assess and determine how far you can stretch yourselves in terms of the terms of concessions, right? So this is what you need to do as far as the first part of the prepare is concerned. Yes, Arunima, tell me.
I just want to draw a parallel here to some of the other topics that we've done. So, for
Yes.
example, even presentation skills or having critical conversations.
Yeah.
I believe even in confidence and influencing, we talked about the idea of preparation,
Correct.
right? So before you're going into a conversation, you
Yeah.
automatically get a lot of confidence. You know how to deal with the other person. You know what points you're going to present if
Yeah.
you've done your thorough preparation.
Yeah.
So that's why even in negotiation is all the more important that you're going into negotiation knowing what is it that you want, what are your points, also
Correct.
trying to anticipate what are the problems, because what would happen is in the conversation, if the other person brings up an issue, you are
Correct.
kind of caught off guard and you don't
Yeah.
know how to answer it. But if
Yeah.
you're prepared with an answer, you can counter it at that moment saying, oh yes, so this is my answer to your question.
Correct.
So that's why we talk about preparation at every, almost in a lot of our
Correct.
classes.
Correct. So just let me kind of try to give an example of what you're trying to say, right? So I'm giving examples that people will probably relate to or connect to, right? So that's why I keep going to a job offer where people often have to
Correct.
negotiate, or an appraisal where people have to negotiate. So if you're going for this, preparation would be to think of, all the terms connected to your job offer, all the points of discussion that you want to have, and all the terms. The terms could be in terms of the salary, it could be in terms of discussing the working hours, it could be in terms of discussing your boss, could be in terms of discussing bonuses or incentives, in terms of joining dates, sometimes for senior position joining bonuses, so on and so forth, right? So there could be so many different aspects of that one negotiation that you need to keep in mind, right? And you need to, in a way, be
Correct.
prepared with your with what you have in mind for each one of them, and also be able to think what the other party could say when it comes to each one of
Correct.
those points that you've divided, right, connected to it. And that's what being prepared is all about, right? It's
Correct.
really nothing more than that, that you need to do. And of course, if you're really job hunting, having a partner is going to help you, right? So having, if you're fresh out of college and if you have three offers, you're in a much better position to choose what you think is the best option, especially if you don't have clarity on what you want to do, right? That just
Correct.
helps you so much better. And the same thing in an appraisal discussion, right? There are so many different points that need to be discussed, so it's better that you be prepared. And you also need to know as to what possibly is your boss going to say about a lot of these issues that will help you give a counter
Absolutely.
to it, right? So I think all of us will agree that in most communication, whether it's conversational skills, critical conversation, presentations, any kind of situation, confidence is very, very important. If you're not confident, you're not going to be able to do it well. And your ability to be confident, preparation plays a part in that, and it plays a major part in that, because the way you can go about responding once you're prepared, and not by hearting stuff, but just knowing what you think
Knowing, yeah,
about each one of these things, knowing what will come on the table, is something that really helps, right? So think each and every discussion through. I'll just give you one more example, okay, of this thing. Now, if somebody is going to buy a flat or an apartment, can I, how ill prepared people are while doing it? And actually, the first time I bought an apartment, I was ill prepared, right? Because the only thing that I fixated on is the cost
right,
and the price. That's the only thing I was fixated on. But there were so many different things, so many different angles to this entire thing that I should have thought of, right? I should have thought of discussing the membership fee, right? Somebody had paid for 3 years versus 2 years. I should have thought of the brokerage, right? How we're going to go about possibly splitting that and what our deal is going to be there. I should have gone about thinking about, what furniture the person is going to keep or not keep in that house, right? What ACs and furnitures he's going to keep, not keep, probably look at a so there are just so many elements, and these are just four. There are just so many elements that I could have possibly prepared on while going into that discussion, which I didn't, because like I said, I
correct,
told you, one of my problems is that I'm impatient, and I clearly didn't have the maturity to prepare well for that discussion.
correct. And just stepping back, like if we talk about the confidence, so
Mhm.
again, something that we covered in our confidence class, and
Yeah.
even when you and I had a discussion on stress, we
Mhm.
often feel underconfident or we feel stressed in an unfamiliar situation.
Yeah.
So if you're posed with like an element that you've not prepared on,
Yeah.
if you go
Yeah.
for a job negotiation and then they
Yeah.
say, okay, what about, let's say, perks or bonuses, I'm
Yeah.
spouting
Yeah.
words,
Yeah.
and you've not really prepared an answer.
Yeah.
So again, there's the risk of you then losing out a good deal there, because you
Yeah.
won't really know what that entails. So then you'll
Correct.
settle for something that your employer's offering, and again, they will try to get away with the best deal that they
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
You're going to settle for a poor deal there. You're also going
Yeah.
to be very underconfident. So you
Yeah.
already kind of
Yeah.
you're on a sort of a back foot there.
Yeah.
So the preparation element is really important for one, like you said, kind of being aware of the bigger picture. So not
Correct.
just one or two elements, but the whole thing, and
Yeah.
uh, having the confidence to kind of negotiate on a lot of other things as well.
Yeah. And just taking that whole employment thing ahead, right? When somebody is a poor negotiator, even if the person on the other side is not a good negotiator, because somebody was a poor negotiator, he'll get a raw deal out of it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then he'll end up having, in a way, a grudge of sorts against the person that he was negotiating with. And that person, didn't probably manipulate them, he didn't do anything. But still, that would happen because you didn't
correct,
think stuff through, right? So whether it comes
correct,
to buying an apartment or whether it comes to renting out an apartment, the same thing applies, right? You being able to think of
correct,
like all the different angles that could possibly come up. What will he possibly say when it comes to this thing, then how will you respond to that? And that just really helps. And another point that I want to make sure is, however much you prepare, not everything in the negotiation is going to go according to your preparation, right? This is not a
yeah,
movie script, but that preparation just helps you become a lot more confident in that situation. If you prepare well, if you try to by heart it, or
correct,
if you expect everything to go as per this preparation that you've done, that's going to, as a matter of fact, be counterproductive for you,
correct,
right? So prepare, but don't expect everything to go exactly according to your preparation. Expect somebody to
correct.
throw a spanner in that thing. And I've typically seen that happening during interviews and during kind of where a job offer will probably happen, is that a person prepared all these answers, and then the person on the other side threw a question or threw a situation or something at him that he was totally unprepared for, and then he doesn't know how to deal with it because he had, in a way, by hearted what his possible responses
Hmm.
could be, right? So don't
Correct.
mistake preparing with by hearting your responses, right?
Absolutely.
preparing is more about just thinking each and every aspect through, having your partners there, being clear on your objective, being clear on what their objective could be, being clear on what are the different things that could come up, how you will respond to it. All those things are a part of your preparation.
Just before we move on, I
Yes.
have one
Yeah.
personal example in a
Yes.
way.
Yes.
So for me, when I was interviewing for my
Yeah.
job, my
Yeah.
first job right out of
Yeah.
college, I had no idea how to
Yeah.
do negotiations.
Yeah.
So ultimately, not that I was unhappy with
Yeah.
the deal.
Yeah.
I don't even know if there was a better deal,
Mm.
right? Because I had no idea how do you negotiate on certain elements. So
Yeah.
I walked away thinking, like I said, I wasn't unhappy, but
Yeah.
maybe there was something better I could have
Yeah.
gotten out of it if I had prepared
Yeah.
better for it in terms
Yeah.
of what's like the market salary or
Correct.
things like that.
Correct.
So you kind
Absolutely.
of also don't know what could have been a better deal for you if you don't go in prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. You couldn't have said it better. You actually couldn't have said it better, right? And you would know, especially in your case, that there was no conniving person at the other end, right?
Yeah,
It's not about the other person really
correct.
having to manipulate it. The other person is trying to do what's the best that they can do in that
Best for
situation,
them.
right?
Absolutely. Correct.
Of what is possible. And again, it needs to be, like we discussed, it needs to be win-win, right? Because at
Yeah,
any point of time, even in an employer employee situation, if you try to give the other person a too much of a raw deal, even that's not going to work, right?
correct.
So there are just so many dimensions which are so interesting in this thing. Right now, let's talk about opening the discussion, which is first, when you're doing any kind of negotiation, depending on the time that you have, um, try to build some rapport with the person, right? I think that's very important in terms of negotiation. Although it's not always feasible to engage in small talk at the start of negotiations, particularly if you're on a tight deadline, doing so can be beneficial. You and your counterpart may be more collaborative and likely to reach an agreement if you spend a few minutes trying to get to know each other. Use the principle of liking. You're more likely to get a better deal if the other person likes you, right? So, my suggestion to each one of you all attending this class is, do not underestimate the importance of rapport building. Do not underestimate the importance of building a relationship, right? It's very important when you get on a negotiation table, especially when negotiations are longer negotiations, more complicated negotiation, that you tend to strike a rapport and relationship with that person. Because although you may take different positions as the negotiations sometimes go on, because your objectives could be diverse, that relationship sometimes and that respect that you have can build bring you all together to that win-win that you're looking for. On the other side, be careful of ensuring that you don't let your relationship get in the middle of a negotiation, right? Because sometimes what happens are people care about the relationship so much, that they don't want to negotiate at all with the other person, right? Because they're so awkward in terms of possibly asking for something, negotiating, bargaining for something, getting something from people, and the relationships come in the middle of that. So the way I would put it is, build a great rapport, have a great relationship, that will help. But again, don't let that relationship come in the way by letting somebody run over you, or you not being assertive enough to ask what you want because you feel awkward around stuff, right? Yes, Arima.
So yeah, I wanted to say the same thing, that
Yeah.
this rapport building should definitely, it's a very strong,
Yeah.
it can be a very strong tool. You should not
Yeah.
underestimate it. And I can
Yeah.
kind of say personally, because
Yeah.
this I know is my strong point.
Mm.
So I really take advantage of it, and it
Yeah.
helps me because I often negotiate with my stakeholders largely on deadlines when
Correct.
it comes to
Correct.
professional work. And with clients, if I have, especially with clients who like me and I have a
Mm.
sort of a personal relationship or a rapport with them,
Yeah.
I can very easily extend deadlines to suit sort of my schedule and ensure that we are giving them better work as opposed to the tighter deadlines that they will start out with.
Mm.
So I really, really take advantage of advantage in a good way.
Mm.
of building rapport, building sort of that, finding that common ground between you and the other person.
Correct.
I think it helps not just in negotiations, but we've spoken about this even in influencing. We've spoken
Yeah,
about this in a lot of other conversational skills, right?
absolutely.
It's a game changer. And when I came into the corporate life, I realized that I need to, like I said, it's my forte. So I then tried to really bank on it and kind of get the most out of it.
Yeah,
Just going back to the interview, the example that I just
yeah,
gave when I was interviewing for my first job, again, it really helped me because it again put me at ease. Then our conversations around the other more awkward topics became so much easier when it came to
yeah,
salary and stuff like that,
yeah,
because we'd become so comfortable with each other.
yeah.
So I really would encourage the coaches to use this wherever possible, because like
Yeah,
we said, it's not possible every time.
correct.
But rapport and finding common ground is
Correct.
important.
Also, I think, especially if you're going to have a tough negotiation on something with
Yes,
another person, you want the person to know that your fight in a way is not with the person, it's on the issue or
correct,
the problem, or whatever it is that you're negotiating, right? I think that is something that you need to get across very, very clearly to them by starting as positively as you can start with that
correct,
person. The person also shouldn't feel that you're doing a tough negotiation because you're in a foul mood, or you're in a bad mood,
correct,
or because you're ready to go at war. None of those things need to come across, right?
correct,
You need to build that rapport by being polite, by making small talk, by making the person feel comfortable, and then you could have the toughest conversation that you need to have, and that's like a whole different issue altogether, right? So this is how you open your
I
discussion. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
I also think that when you build rapport with someone and find common ground,
Yeah,
you in a way then will automatically genuinely demonstrate care for them,
yeah,
and you'll look out for their interests as well. So you don't
correct,
have to force or kind of fake the interest, in, okay, I'm going to try to get to your needs, because if you're genuinely sort of want to kind of maintain a rapport with them,
yeah,
you automatically start looking out for their interests as well along with yours.
correct,
So again, your negotiation just becomes all the more easy. You're going to look for win-win solutions as
correct,
opposed to it being a competition, because you're
correct.
treating the other person as, we're just kind of counterparties here, but I actually am your friend, and
Yeah,
I want to try and get a good deal for you as
yeah,
well.
yeah. And Arunima, I must tell you that most success in business settings happen from having great long-term associations and relationships with people,
Correct.
right? And this is
Correct.
not just some buzzword or some gyan. This is just the truth of it, right?
Yeah.
When you have strong long-term relationships with people, that benefits you. To give you an example, if you have a strong long-term relationship with your banker, that really
Yeah.
helps take that stress off your head, right? Because
Correct.
somebody else is looking into it. If you have a great vendor for something else, that's just amazing. If you have a great boss, that just helps. It makes life so much easier for
Correct.
you in different situations, right? And with each one of these stakeholders, you're going to have to negotiate at different points of time. And if you're the kind of person that really builds rapport and, like you said, looks out for the other person, you'll end up getting a you'll be a good negotiator in the medium and long run. You may
Correct.
lose a couple of points in a certain discussions, but over a period of time, both of you are looking out for each other is a more beautiful way of functioning, and
Correct.
just better for all parties involved than otherwise, right? So this major uh, mind shift needs to happen for people to start negotiating better, in my opinion, right? Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about opening the discussion. So we said start with building rapport, then describe your position. This stage is about understanding each other's needs and interests, gathering facts, and sharing opinions and feelings. Doing so will help you work collaboratively towards a win win situation. Outline what you want to achieve from the negotiation, share your goals and objectives, ask the counterparty to share their preferred outcomes as well. Find out what their priorities are and what they are willing to compromise on, right? If they're willing to tell you that. Clarify your doubts and check if you have understood the opposite party's position, interests correctly. Okay, now this is a very interesting topic. In today's world, and I'm assuming at all points of time during human history, everybody thought that they were very busy. But at least today, people think that they're very busy. So after you've done your preparation in a certain discussion and you've come onto the table, you probably build a little bit of rapport with the people, with the person or people that you're with. It often makes sense for you um, to tell the person what your position is, right? Tell them what your objective is, what you wish to achieve, what terms you want on a certain thing. It makes sense for you to put your cards in a way on the table and invite the other person to put their cards on the table as well, right? And this will save you a lot of time. This will bring a lot of transparency to the issue. It will help you resolve stuff much sooner that you'd want to, because there's also a cost and price for time spent on certain things, right? So kind of putting your the preparation that you've done, now you're going to talk about that things and say, okay, these are some of the things as far as this is concerned which are important for me. This is something that I am looking for from this particular discussion, right? And then to ask the person, so what is it that you're looking for, or what is it that are your goals, your priorities when it comes to this thing, and inviting the other person to put his stuff down on the table. And that's going to help both of y'all so much, right, to reach to a conclusion that is win-win. Okay, so describe your position. That's what you need to do. Now, make the first offer. Right. So this is something which is very, very important. A big learning for me on the topic of negotiation, because I wouldn't do it this way. Set an anchor with your first offer. The anchor strongly influences the rest of the negotiation. To achieve the best possible finishing position, start as ambitiously as you can without losing credibility. This is very important. Aim for the best outcome with your anchor. Your first offer sets the limit on your possible deal. If you're buying, start bidding low. If you're selling, start the bidding high. There's no moving it closer to where you want to go. It'll only move the other way, right? So let me try to explain this thing to you in slightly more simpler terms, because this is a very important, um, very, very important point, right? Okay, Arunima, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so let's assume that you are selling a property, right? That you have a lovely property. Let's assume in Goa, where both Arunima and myself come from. Okay, and you're selling a property, right? Now you've gone with a potential buyer there. Now, when we talk about the anchor, we're typically talking about the one term that is most important. And let's assume in the case of buying that property, that one term which is most important. There are going to be lots of other terms that you need to keep in mind as well, right? Not just that one term, but that one term is probably the property price, right? Now, the anchor figure basically talks about who is going to talk about this price first amongst the two of you all, right? You are the seller, you are the buyer, right? So who's going to talk about the price, which is the main factor, first? Now, what this principle says is, irrespective of who you are, be the first to talk about that price, right? So let's assume that in your mind, the price of this, the bare minimum that you should get for this particular property is 10 lakh rupees, right? So that's like your walk away price. You're not going to take anything below 10 lakh rupees. So maybe be the first one to put a figure down where you say, okay, you know what, I'm looking for a figure of 15 lakhs for this property, right? That's what I'm looking at for this property. Right now, what tends to happen is, when this person says 15 lakhs, the negotiation between you and the other party will remain close to these 15 lakhs, right? So it'll go from probably a 15 lakhs to a 12 lakhs, or it will go around this particular figure. Right now, if the buyer is the first one to put a figure down and he says, hey, you know what, I'm looking at 5 lakhs, right, for this property, right? He puts this figure down, then your negotiation, whether you know it consciously or subconsciously, tends to be around from, you'll go from saying 5 to 8 lakhs, right? That's what you'll tend to go in. So whoever puts the anchor, I hope you know what an anchor is in a ship, right? Whoever puts that anchor figure down, the negotiation more or less revolves around that particular anchor figure. So therefore, be the first one to put the anchor figure down. Now, what does this mean? Now, in your mind, you know that this property, the bare minimum that you will settle for is 10 lakh rupees. So if you're a seller and now you know that the market price will be anywhere around 10 to 12 lakhs of this particular property, right? That's what you know the market price will be, 10 to 10 lakhs of it. And if you go and you tell the buyer saying, oh, you know what, I want 25 lakhs for this property, right? When you know that the market price will be 10 to 12 lakhs, this particular buyer will think that you've lost your mind, that you're ridiculous, right? So then he won't really want to transact with you, because you've put together a figure of 25 lakhs, which is way too high above the market value which is there. So the buyer won't do it. Similarly, maybe even 5 lakhs is too less, right? But let's assume that the buyer says, okay, I'm willing to pay 3 lakhs for the property, right? And you know that the market value of that is anywhere from a 10 to 12 lakh rupees. And if you say 3 lakhs, the seller is going to say, hey, you know what, this buyer is ridiculous. So he's this 3 lakhs, he knows nothing about the property, so I don't even want to do business with this guy, right? He's talking nonsense, right? So you don't want to go too high while putting the anchor figure, you don't want to go too low while putting the anchor figure. Neither things will help, right? But be the first one to put that anchor figure, because your negotiations will happen anywhere close to that figure that you first put in. And that's exactly how the mind works, so you can't really do anything about it, right? We are in a way wired like that. Now that you know this particular fact, okay, um, if somebody does that to you, ensure that you don't get anchored around that figure, right? So for example, let's assume that you are selling a property and somebody comes with you and says, hey, you know what, I want 3 lakh rupees or I want 5 lakh rupees. Don't get caught up in what that person says, right? Be comfortable. Even if that person says 5 lakh rupees, be comfortable in terms of saying, hey, you know what, 5 lakhs is way too low for this particular thing. It's not even in my realm of dealing with this property. What I was looking for the property is anything from a 15 lakhs is what I was looking at, right? That's the amount that I was looking at, and I'm willing to negotiate a little based on that. So even if somebody says 5 lakhs, you be comfortable taking it back to 15 lakhs if he puts the anchor figure first. Otherwise, be the first to put the anchor figure yourself. Right now, the only situation in which this anchor figure logic is not recommended is when you don't know anything about the price of something, right? If you don't know anything about it, then you don't know where to throw that anchor figure itself. And if that is the case, then you may as well keep quiet and may as well ask the other party to get started if you have no knowledge on that particular issue or subject before you go into it. However, that shouldn't be the case, because if you've prepared well, you will have that base knowledge around that subject, right, that you're talking about. So if you have that base knowledge, it makes sense for you to be the first one to prepare and go in, right? Yes, Arunima, tell me.
I
Have I
have to
explained this
just
fairly well?
Yes, yes. And I just want to add to that. So, just
Yes.
to talk about how important anchors are and how they influence negotiation,
Mm,
research actually shows that when a seller
mm,
makes the first offer, the
mm,
final price
mm.
is usually higher
Yeah.
than if the buyer makes the first offer. Why?
Wow.
Because the buyer will obviously make a lower offer as opposed to the seller.
Correct.
So if you kind of compare studies, this is the kind of trend that comes out. It just shows you
Correct.
how an anchor actually influences the negotiation.
Correct.
Um,
And it's so strange, Arunima. It's not strange actually. It's quite interesting that I have a lot of friends who are in real estate, either as people in construction or real estate brokers, and it's so amazing how this principle works, right? Because the minute a
Correct.
person as a buyer comes to them and throws an anchor figure which is much lower, the discussion often revolves around that amount
Around
that
that
they've
price. Yeah.
quoted, right? It goes up
Correct.
from that figure. And even
Correct.
if the seller knows this principle, sometimes he still operates on that same principle, right? That is,
Correct.
but again, it all depends on your partner, right? But because when you
Correct.
have partner, when you know that, okay, you know what, the property that I have is hugely in demand, right? So
Mm.
everybody wants this property. I've built a great network of brokers that are going to bring 1 million people to see my property. You're far more comfortable putting that 15 lakh figure in somebody's face. Otherwise you're
Correct.
going to be very scared and again take a raw deal, right? So I keep coming back to Batna because it's so important and so underrated by
Correct.
people, because getting a great Batna means you need to do a lot of other work, right, to get a
Correct.
lot of alternatives. If you've built a building and you have 100 apartments to sell, selling 100 apartments is difficult. If you're not going to create that pipeline for yourself, you're always going to be giving yourself a raw deal around it, right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
I keep going back to that. Okay, so
I
anchor
had
fig.
I had a
Yes,
question as
yes,
well.
yes,
Sorry.
go back. Yeah,
Um, Also, again through my research, I've come across both schools. Some say
yeah,
that make the offer first.
yeah,
There's also some of them recommend that don't be the first one to make the offer,
yeah,
because let the other person speak up first, share their offer first, so they're kind of putting their chips on the table. You
yeah,
know what their expectations are, and then you negotiate from there. So, what do you
correct.
recommend? Which strategy should people go for?
Correct. I think it's very important for people to know the theory of the anchor figure,
Hmm.
because let's assume that you go into a certain discussion where you don't put the figure in first and they put the
Hmm.
figure in. If you know the anchor philosophy, you're not going to get tied down to that figure that they've put in,
Hmm.
right? So for
Correct.
example, they offer you and this happens to us all the time when we're doing business, right? When if there's a if we go to a corporate and we're offering a training program for 30,000 rupees, right? So that is what we would typically like to close a day's training at. And somebody will come and say, oh no, but I can only pay you 10,000 bucks for this, right? And then the
Correct.
discussion goes from 10,000 upwards versus
Between the two of them. Yeah.
yeah. So when if he says 10,000 bucks, I still need to be fully aware that if he says this, I don't do the discussion up from here, right? I
Hmm.
still keep this in mind and probably lower it a little to 25,000 bucks. Okay.
Correct.
Now everything depends on how desperately I want his business, right? So if I want him desperately, even if I know this, I'll still close it at 15,000 bucks because I'll say it's a COVID offer, or you get what
Correct.
I'm trying to say, right? And I'll still close it if I'm
Yeah.
desperate and I need to meet my targets in a way. I'll do that. But again, that becomes very important. But like I said, the only time where you don't put your chips on the table as far as possible is when you have no idea of what the figure could be, and you think that
Correct.
the other side could offer you a figure which is way higher than what you expect, right?
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
the time you really keep quiet and wait for him to talk about it. And that very often happens even in
Correct.
property deals, right? If you get some kind of a some outsider, or somebody that's typically a rich kid, that's what they call it, right? A rich kid who's come to buy property in Goa and doesn't have not done his research well. um, Very often, you could probably ask him, so what do you think is the worth of this property, right?
Correct.
And wait for him to answer. Maybe he says something which is much higher than what the rate of that property is, and then you peg him
Correct.
onto that figure because
Correct.
you asked him the question, what do you think should be the worth of this beautiful property? What do you think in your mind
Correct.
it is? And you're waiting for him to say a much higher thing. He says that, great, that becomes the anchor figure. If he says something too
Correct.
low, you don't get anchored to that figure, right? So the
Yeah.
whole point is knowing the anchor figure
Clearly.
concept
Yeah.
really helps you in each and every situation while negotiating. And again, if you ask me after Batna, if there's something which I think is very very important, it is the anchor figure thought, right? That
Correct.
really makes a big difference to stuff. Mm. The other thing, just by the way, when it comes to anchor figures, um, ensure if you're going to buy something and somebody says, oh, the price of this is 1,000, right, which is very high, don't be embarrassed to say, I want it for 300, right? Don't be embarrassed to say that. That's where, because let him say, "Ah, I'm not going to sell." Let him say that, and then don't be embarrassed to again say, okay, come on, let's talk, right? Because you know that what he wants is nowhere close to 300 bucks. So you say, okay, now tell me, I want 300, you want 1,000. Come on, now what can we do, right? And maybe you'll reach a the split the difference logic of saying, okay, let's get to 500 or 600, you'll still get a much better deal if you're not scared to get embarrassed by saying a 300 when the other side says $1,000, right? And a lot of times the problem is that we get too embarrassed while talking, and this again goes across the board, right? If you're negotiating for a hotel room, for that matter, if you've gone and if you're negotiating for a hotel room, if they say it's $5,000, you say, I'm sorry, my budget is 2,500 only, right? That's how much I have. They say 2,000, no, we can't do it. You say, come on, check with your management, it's late at night, 2,500 will work, right? Because now you again kind of made your point clear that, okay, you said 5,000, but I'm not going to operate around 5,000, I'm going to 2,500, right? I'm going much lower and trying to anchor you there. Although you tried to anchor me at $5,000 first, I'm not going to keep that in mind. I'm going to go at a $2,500, and then you try to see whether you can negotiate upwards of 2,500 and not lower on $5,000, right? And again, that will help you so much in getting a better deal. Even if you close at 4,000, you've got the best deal there in that situation, right? So again, anchor theory plays such a big role in every kind of a negotiation.
Since you said that, don't be embarrassed to make like a low
Yeah,
offer.
yeah,
There's a saying that came to my mind, which is,
yeah,
you miss 100% of the shots you don't take,
yeah,
and it kind of
absolutely.
applies in negotiations, because
Yeah,
just kind of put it out there,
yeah,
when you're asking for a
yeah,
better offer, or you're
yeah,
putting out. Of course, don't be absolutely ridiculous, but when you're putting
yeah,
out an offer or you're asking for offers, just kind of go for it, because
yeah.
the worst that could probably happen is that they'll say no, but at
Correct,
least you'll get another a starting point to begin your negotiation from.
correct,
So
absolutely.
I think it's very important to kind of keep that in mind when you're
Yeah, and
negotiating.
also when it comes to doing your negotiations, which are your one-time negotiation, right?
Yeah.
Your one-time negotiation, which is the sale of a property, is a one-time negotiation. It's not a recurring negotiation. There, you need to use your anchor
Yeah.
figures even in an even better fashion. If I'm going to a hotel and I'm going to be staying there once every year, right, there's no relationship that is at stake between me and the guy that's at that counter. At that point of time, the only thing I need to use, in a way, do a little bit of rapport building at the start, but your anchor figure, which is going to help you get the best deal, because there aren't too many variables there, right? Now, okay, let me give you an example, another example. This will really help people, right, around hotel rooms, because I've stayed at a lot of them given my profession. So if somebody says that, okay, this costs $5,000 plus GST, okay, and you say, okay, this is too expensive for me. This is what the guy at the counter quoted. Huh? So here, of course, at the counter, he has the right to tell you what the rate is, right? You can't just go and say, I want a room for this amount, right? You can't say that. You're going to have to ask him, what's the room tariff, right? So he
Correct.
said the tariff is this. And then I say, oh, no, but I want it for 2,500 plus GST. He says, oh, no, 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 no. Then I say, listen, you know what? It's 10 o'clock at night already. I'm just going to sleep the night, and I'm going to be off like tomorrow morning. So, you know what, give it to me for 2,500. And he says, no, no, no. You say, okay, what's the best you can do? So then he comes back and says, okay, the best that I can do is $4,000 plus GST, right? Now this depends on how much time you have. Okay, so you say, give me 4,000 plus GST, but add a breakfast to it, right? Add a breakfast to it, and add a premium room instead of your standard room to it, right? So add these two elements to it, make it $4,000 and give it to me, right? So you've not just, now look at how you've done your negotiation. You've not, first you played your anchor card, right? And then you just didn't think of this one aspect of negotiating with him.
Yeah.
You thought of the two other aspects which are there in this case, which is breakfast and a better room that you got for that $4,000. And then maybe he'll say no, and maybe he'll say, but whatever. This is the way you need to think of negotiations, right? When you're doing it. So there are simple things that can kind of help you a lot. Make sense, Arunima?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm? Okay, cool. Yeah, if you start too low, this is something that we've discussed already, it'll be difficult to give your counterpart concessions, as you'll be left with little room to bargain. So basically, if you're looking at 10 lakh rupees for that property, and if you start with 11 lakhs, that's not going to give you too much of room to bargain, right? And there's another kind of big thing when it comes to negotiations, which is negotiations need to be win-win, but negotiations also need to leave both parties with a sense of satisfaction that they've got the best value out of it, right? So let me I always share this example when I'm giving a class on negotiation, right? So Arunima, you may want to come back on screen. I don't know whether I've shared this story with you. So a long time back, I went to buy a case for my BlackBerry, right? A phone case for my BlackBerry. So you can imagine that this story dates back a long, long time. And I went to this store, which was like a roadside store, and I said, okay, I want a case for the BlackBerry. So I said, how much? How much does it cost? So he said, $1,000. So I said, 1,000? I said, I'll pay 200 for it, right? Because I knew this anchor theory, right? So I said, 1,000? I don't care 1,000. I'll pay 200. He says, Lelo, right? And he just gives it to me. And now in my mind, I'm thinking, he gave it to me for 200 bucks, the price that I asked for, and I'm still not happy about it. Why am I not happy about it? Because I feel like, oh, maybe if I said 150, you would have agreed to that. I still didn't get a good enough deal, right? When it comes to it. So that's very, very important. And that's there on our next kind of section as well in terms of concessions,
Concessions.
right? Like be very careful when you trade concessions, and which means that if he had said, nahi saab, 200 mein to nahi ho sakta bilkul, at least you need to pay me 400 bucks. And then even if I had agreed on 300 bucks with him, I would have walked away with that discussion with more happiness than I got it for 200 bucks, right? Because the fight wasn't there. He gave up too easily on that because he was too lazy and he wanted to close the deal. Sure, I paid for it, but there could be another situation where somebody said, no, no, I'm scared now. Maybe I would get 150 and I didn't get that deal. So you need to make people fight for every concession. You need to ensure that you do that, because if that doesn't happen, again, you're not going to be left with that you found value in that deal, which is so important, right? So again, if you start too low here, it's difficult for you to give some concession to the other person, right? And the person, in most cases, if you're dealing with something important, unless you're going to say just one thing, you're going to say, this is my price, I don't want anything higher, I don't want anything lower. Like, for example, the market price is 10 to 12 lakhs and you say 10 lakhs, done, right? I'm not going to go a pie lower, I'm not asking for anything higher. That's another way that people like to negotiate, right? But tomorrow, in most cases, if you say 11 lakhs when 10 lakhs is the last price, your walkaway price, you've not given yourself enough room to negotiate. The other person is not going to feel happy that he's got a good deal, right? But if you quote a slightly higher amount, which is 15 lakhs, and then give him 2 lakhs of that deal, right? Then he'll still feel the happiness of having negotiated and gotten value out of it, right? So that's important. After you make your offer, allow the other side to make a counter offer, to convince the counterparty to accept your initial offer. Share how the offer will benefit both of you, right? So that's important. So Arunima has given a lovely example here. um, Make your offer proposal. I suggest we undertake a 3-month trial of flexible working. I also propose that I should be given a company car. Invite a counter proposal where you say, how would you respond to this? What do you think about this thing, right? So get the other person's view on it, then sell the benefits to the other party, right? So flexible working hours will mean that I'll be able to take on more hours and greater responsibilities. I'll also get time to participate in more trainings. With a company car, I'll have greater reach and be able to increase your customer base, right? So tell him why, right? The thing that you're proposing to him, what are the benefits to him, and then also explain the benefits that there are to you. I'll be able to work flexibly, organize my family around work better. With extra training, I'll feel more fulfilled and have better hopes of advancement within the company. I'll feel more confident arriving at clients, and a company car is a real incentive for me to stick with the company, right? So you're explaining the benefits to on both sides of this thing as you open the discussion. Okay, now let's move to the third part, which is the bargain. Now, this is something that we've discussed already. Don't focus just on the money. right, on just the money. Business negotiations are often about money. However, if you go into a negotiation fixated only on the price, you limit your awareness of the larger picture. So even the hotel example that I gave you, don't just get fixated with 4,000 or 5,000 or 2,000, right? Have that discussion because that's important. But also think about the breakfast, also think about the premium room, also think about the other things if you're going to negotiate well with him. Price is important, but it's just one aspect of the deal. Consider what else you could negotiate. For example, perhaps you can agree on an exclusivity clause, add additional services, or improve the terms of the contract in some way, right? Where you say, okay, I agree to this thing of yours, but this is what I want in exchange or in return for that thing, right? So you give him the price, but you get something also back in return from that. Yes, Arunima.
Something, so sort of an idea here that
Yeah.
is eye-opening for me is the whole concept of price versus value,
Mm,
right? Because you could be paying something, you could be
mm.
paying a very less amount for something,
Yeah,
but not quite getting value out of it.
correct.
I
Absolutely.
often I think you feel very happy in situations where even if you pay more, if you're really getting more than like more things in that much
Yeah,
price, you feel
yeah,
like, oh, I'm really getting a value out of this,
correct,
right?
correct,
So if you again are fixated on the price, you'll often settle for something that's going to be cheaper,
correct.
which may satisfy certain people. But I
Yeah,
feel in a lot of situations, if you kind of reach a deadlock with
yeah,
your price,
correct.
if you are open to the larger picture, you'll find a deal which you may have to spend a little bit more, but definitely get more
More
value out
value
of it
out of
as
it.
opposed to the cheaper price.
Absolutely. And this is the mistakes just so many people make when they negotiate, right? They just
Correct.
focus on that one thing, which is the cost or the price, and don't focus on any other aspect. They just
Correct.
focus on the salary and don't have discussions on all the other things that they're supposed to have, right?
Correct.
Because they're just so fixated on that one thing and often get themselves into trouble on all the other aspects that they should be discussing on the other side, which is what is the nature of work I'm going to be doing? Who's going to be my boss? What are going
Yeah.
to be the new responsibilities that I'm going to get? What is possibly the bonus besides the salary? Da, da, da. There's just so many aspects to that. But if you're just focused on one thing and not concentrate on the bigger thing, you may end up losing out sometimes, right? Now, trades and concession strategies. Ask questions to identify your counterpart's potential negotiable variables and concessions. So, the best way to persuade somebody is to listen, right? The best way to persuade somebody is through your ears, right? So the more that you kind of sit, ask questions, listen, and gain knowledge from the other side, especially when it comes to complicated discussions, that often helps a lot. Trade concessions one at a time. Don't offer them all at once, right? So I think that becomes very important that you trade stuff one at a time, um, because when you trade that one at a time, it also ends up making it feel a lot more valuable than you trading an entire thing all at once, right? Make sure you don't give out concessions too quickly or too early in the negotiation, right? This makes you seem too eager. So this is exactly what the guy that sold me the mobile cover did, right? So he gave in too easily. If he said 1,000, I said 200, he said okay, right? And again, that seemed like, okay, that mobile case is not even worth $200. That's what he felt. But if he really fought that thing out, right, with me, it would feel a lot more valuable, and I would have probably ended up paying $300 for it instead of $200, right? And yet returned home happy. And I would have told my spouse, I got a great deal for $300. Now I came with $200, and I think I got a bad deal, right? Because he traded his concession too quickly, right? Trade your inexpensive concessions first, right? So whatever you're giving in, don't try to give the big thing first. Try to give the smallest thing first, as a concession. When giving a concession, quantify and emphasize its value. Present each concession with the same amount of emphasis and resistance, right? So that's something that becomes uh, very, very important. Okay, so just to give you an example of this concession thing, like Arunima, she was saying that she discusses deadlines a lot, right, with someone. And let's assume that you've given a client a certain deadline, of saying that, okay, I can submit this by the end of the week, which is at a Friday 5 o'clock, right? Because I'm really jam packed with work. But the client really insists that he needs something on Wednesday for whatever reasons, as clients do all the time, right? They say, I really need this on Wednesday. So if that's the case, then you can do can build a concession, or you can ask for him saying, okay, if you want this thing by Wednesday, I understand it, but there are two parts of this particular project that you're talking about that I need to submit. I will submit part A by Wednesday. Is that okay with you? Right, so you've not given into the whole thing, but you've traded one thing for that person, right? Or another way in which you could have traded something is to say, okay, I will give you part A and I'll give you a rough version of part B when it comes to it, right? So that's another way in which you can kind of trade it, and not just seem like, oh, it's easy for me to do it, or in the end, work overtime in order to give it to him by Wednesday, when you could easily negotiate something which is both win-win. He gets what he wants on Wednesday, and you kind of lighten the load slightly on yourself, given all the other things that you would have, right? So that's the way in which you can kind of trade concessions on things. Yes, Arunima.
Regarding the last point on the slide, so this is
Yes.
something I actually picked up from our own salespeople when I would be
Yeah.
on calls with them.
Yeah.
Uh, Even if you have a concession which you
Yeah.
know you can very easily give away and it's inexpensive to you,
Mm.
it's you should make it seem like you're giving away something really important, because
Yeah.
of course then it makes that like your phone case cover, right? So it makes the
Yeah.
other person feel like, oh, they're
Yeah.
really making this exception for me.
Yeah.
So often, when I would negotiate on deadlines, and I would see this like from our salespeople who would negotiate on, we have post training tools, right? And I
Yeah.
know that already they've discussed with the sales head that you can give these away, but
Yeah.
we'll make it seem on the call that, you know what, I'm going to talk to my sales head and I'm going to try and get this for you.
Yeah.
Though it was pre-decided, we already knew that we were going to give this away, but it just makes the client feel like, oh wow,
Yeah.
they're gonna do this for me. So it makes
Absolutely.
it seem much more significant.
Yeah.
So don't give away anything without that emphasis, without the resistance, no matter where it lies on your priority list. Show
Absolutely.
the same amount of resistance about giving it away.
Correct.
So it,
I-
yeah,
I'll give you another example. So very often when clients says, "Oh, I'm not willing to pay 30,000 rupees for your program. I am going to pay only 20,000 rupees for it," right? Now, not that we can always agree with that, but let's say COVID situation, right? And we probably need more business than usual, and we say, "Okay, let's settle at a 22,500." Right, let's say he said, no, 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 okay, it's 20,000, 20. I really can't pay, otherwise you're going to lose the business, and I want to do business with you, but you're going to lose it. 20,000 is the budget approval that I've got. So I say, okay, you've got a budget approval for 20,000, let me check and come back. So you show some resistance right there. When you come back to the discussion, you say, okay, I'll give it to you for 20,000, but you need to send it to me in writing that after that my payment is going to come within 30 days of us doing the program for you, right? Because you're a big corporate. In the past, we've seen that there have been huge delays in your payments that have come. So I will give it to you at this price, but what you need to give me back is a commitment of 30 days payment. If you can do that, let's work out something which is win-win in that situation, right? So A, to give him that 20,000, you showed a lot of resistance to concede on the
correct.
cost. Then after you conceded on the cost, the next thing that you did was you said, okay, I will do this for you, but I need this thing in return. And
A
you're
give
not,
and take.
correct, give and take in a way, right? You're not being difficult for the sake of being difficult, because that 30-day clause is important for you. That payment coming in on time is important for your cash flows, right? So that's how you're not just letting it go and not getting anything back from him in return, because
Correct.
then it's not a real negotiation that is there, right? Never
Correct.
give, yeah, you have the point right here. Never give anything away without getting something in return. If you do, you are not negotiating, you're just conceding with the other party, right? So if you're going to give them that 20,000 price, ensure that you get the payment terms to 30 days, right? If you are going to give him the very often, Arunima, I'm sure the salespeople use this strategy a lot, right? A client will say, okay, I want this by Wednesday, right? And you know that it's almost impossible for you to do it, but then the salespeople will come, they'll say, tell the client, listen, this is almost impossible for me to do it. I'm doing you a huge favor by giving this to you by Wednesday, because I've really pulled a lot of strings, so you're making it a big deal. And then you
Yep.
say, now that I've given you by Wednesday, I want the next two projects that you have as well.
Yeah.
When it comes to this, can you give me a commitment on the next two projects that are there? Because I'm giving you something here, but I'm saying, okay, let me use this concession and trade something with it, right? That's again a sign of a good negotiation. And sure, right, all of us need to be tactful while doing this. We need to know the situation, the timing of different things when we're doing this. There's no rule that will apply across all situations. Sometimes it may be a wrong time to do that trading, right? And maybe the client is in a real emergency of a lifetime, and that's not the time that you want to do this trading, right? There you'd come across
Correct.
as being insensitive to him, right? So there you just want to shut up and do it for him because he's a long standing client, and it's a recurring relationship which is there. But if not, ensure that you use this philosophy.
And just one more thing for the coaches who've attended six
Yeah,
principles. This is principle of reciprocity, like at
yeah,
play.
yeah,
That you're giving something and saying that I'm giving this to you, but can you
yeah,
give me this back? So
yeah,
it's just it's such a good way of using that.
yeah,
And like you said, the resistance thing, because also in long term relationships, which it's sort of like, okay, you kind of give into a smaller battle. So you say that, like I said, I know that I can give this to them by Wednesday, but I'll
yeah,
put up a sort of a 5 thing that, oh, I check with my team leader and come back. And I would even, if possible, take those 5 minutes to say, okay, I'm going to check in and send them a
yeah.
WhatsApp and saying, okay, because I'm hoping they remember this later on,
Mm,
and then I can use it for a different negotiation there. So it's all,
absolutely,
you have to be really smart about kind of playing your cards right,
absolutely.
depending on the situation.
Correct. And that give and take, right? So it's all about give and take. It's all about
Yeah,
reciprocity in the end. Here
correct.
you did a favor on them. Now you're expecting them to do a favor on you, because often what will happen is, okay, you submitted something on Wednesday, a couple of weeks down the line on the next project, you could screw up on something, right? And then
Yeah,
you want them to have your back in a way. But if
correct.
you didn't make them aware that you were doing them a favor by pulling in the deadline, when you screwed up a couple of weeks down the line, they wouldn't be that kind to you and the
Yep.
company, right? So that's where it helps. Okay, we discuss this as well. So keep a score of all the concessions you give. Use this to summarize how much has been given at key points in the negotiation as a means to resist further concessions, right? So that's what you need to do. Be very particular about all the concessions that you've made. Use that in the summary so that they don't ask for more stuff, right? Now, use silence. If you make an offer and the other party says this is way too low, don't respond right away, right? Most of the time the other party will fill the silence with useful information you would never have learned if you were speaking. He might list reasons why your offer is low or why he needs to deal closed quickly. Listen and think more. Listen and think more than you speak. When you do speak, ask open ended questions. You can't meet in the middle unless you know what the other person needs, right? This is a very kind of nice point which is there. People often find during conversations silence to be awkward, and it is awkward, right? When you if you're in the car with somebody and there's a lot of silence, it is awkward unless you're really close to that person that you're in the car with. And every time there is some silence, people try to fill that silence, and often they try to fill it by saying stuff which tells you more about that person or the situation or what they're thinking. And that's what you want to do when you're negotiating, right? You want to know what's on the other person's mind. That will help you play your cards much better in that situation, right? So this is something that could help. Quantify demands and objections. When the counterpart objects to your offer, ask them to quantify. For example, if they say your price is too high, of course do the silence bit first, but then you can respond eventually by saying, okay, by how much, right? Because the minute you actually end up quantifying it, it's going to be better. Another tip that you can use, especially around prices, if somebody says, oh, but your price is too high, a simple question to ask them is saying, as compared to what, right? So if you're a car salesman, if they say, "Arey, this car is damn expensive," you'll say, okay, as compared to what? Then they start thinking and they'll say, oh, as compared to that other car. And then very often that other car will be no comparison to this car as far as specs are concerned or specifications are concerned. So then you'll say, listen, the car that you're comparing with me with is not even close to this car, right? And let me tell you why it's not close to this car. And then you tell all the reasons why it's not close. And that's why you're paying a premium on this. So every time somebody says your price is too high, the first question, these two questions are important, right? As compared to what? If you don't ask that question, you can't negotiate well. And then, okay, it's still too high. High by how much, right? So you get a specific quantity which will help you negotiate. But of the two questions, I love the question which has helped me a lot just by asking, as compared to what, right? And that kind of confuses the other side, and they're like, oh yeah, actually as compared to what? And then they think, and that helps you kind of get back into the game of the conversation. Yes, Arunima.
I too love the as compared to what, because then you can highlight
Yeah,
your features, right, compared to the
yeah,
other thing. And
yeah,
here again, the whole point of asking how high
yeah.
gives you kind of a point, because let's say they say your price is too high, and what if you then count share a counter offer that is lower than they would have gone for? So
Mm,
when if they say 100 is too much, and you say, okay, what about 50? But what if they
yeah,
would have been okay with the 70?
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So that's why it's better to ask, put
yeah.
get that number from them. So they say, I think it's 20 rupees too high. Okay,
Okay,
then pay me 80.
correct.
As opposed to, you really lowering your offer.
Correct. And
So
by the way, if they say it's 20 rupees too high and they say 80, like we've discussed, don't jump and say, okay, pay me 80, right? What you're
yeah,
supposed to do is to say,
correct.
okay, I can't really do 80, but I can do 95. So, no, 90. Okay, maybe let me check, maybe 90, right? So the person, for him, it's a well earned negotiation where he's going to
Correct.
go back feeling happier than if you gave it for 90, right? So one of the other tips, which I don't think we've put it here in this because there's just so much to kind of cover, but is the whole thing of don't split the difference, right? So if you say 100 and another person says 80, don't say, okay, chalo, let's make it 90 and close on 90, right? This is often a poor negotiation strategy. So when another person says 100, he says 80, you say, okay, you start with 95, right? If 95, you then go 92.5, right? Because even if you do 92.5, you get 2.5 more than what you would have got otherwise, right?
Yep.
And when it comes to these small figures, it may not seem like that big a deal, but when you're talking about really big deals, these small things really make a difference, right? So if you're talking about 50 lakhs and 70 lakhs, right? So and somebody says, okay, let's make it 60 lakhs, right? And you say, don't say 60 lakhs, right? You say, again, depending on which side you are, you say, no, let's make it 67.5 or 65 or 62.5, right? Because even if you get 65, it's 5 lakhs more. It's 62, you get 2.5 lakhs more. 2.5 lakhs is a lot of money, right? If you just said agreed on 60, you wouldn't get that 2.5 lakhs more, right? So don't split the difference. That's again a big mistake that people make when they're negotiating. Okay. Yes. Don't give an ultimatum. Don't use words like this is our best and last offer, right? Why shouldn't you do that? When you give ultimatums, the chances of finding a compromise become slim because you back the other party into a corner. This approach can also come across as aggressive and domineering. Aren't you tired of seeing this person's face? I am. We've used this guy so often. No, Arunima, he's your favorite. There is a
I'll
difference
repeat it
between
again.
giving an ultimatum and setting a deadline. Experienced negotiators use deadlines to encourage the other party to reach a decision or to break a deadlock, right? Both parties are then focused on reaching an agreement within the time frame, which can speed up the process, right? So the key point here is know the difference between, don't give ultimatums, because it's embarrassing for you to step back from ultimatums. You say this is our best and final offer, we can't do anything more, and take it or leave it kind of thing. If you're really going to say take it or leave it, you need to take it and leave it then, right? That means that offer that the other person is given is really a ridiculous offer which doesn't work, and you say, okay, take this and leave this. If that's not the case, don't use words like that, right? That can be detrimental for you to come back from. Setting a deadline is just requesting the person in a way to get back to him at a particular date, at a particular time, right? And actually doing that creates a sense of urgency that moves the deal forward, right? So that's what you're supposed to do. Okay, now we're on to the last part, which is agreeing and closing the negotiations. Once you have come to an agreement, summarize the discussion, all the terms and conditions, clarify any doubts that you may have, reconfirm the terms and concessions both parties have agreed, right? So this becomes, that's basically, you need to summarize the discussion that you've had. Now, please do this step of summarizing the discussion, right? Because if you don't summarize the discussion, very often there are misunderstandings there where both of y'all could walk off that table thinking that you have an agreement and you haven't discussed all the other terms in detail, and then you realize a month down the line that you don't really have an agreement, and then you start negotiating again, which is detrimental for both of y'all, right? So don't think that, oh, is bare mein baat hi nahi hui, matlab ye, this I can slip away this thing, or I can get away with this thing, which is often a major point, but you just pray that you will get away with it, right? Because you haven't spoken about it. Please don't do that, right? Because it ends up wasting everybody's time in the picture, causing much bigger complications later, causing trust issues later. So whatever it is, at the end of it, summarize the entire discussion, all the terms and conditions that are there, and concessions that I've given. Be as transparent as possible in that situation. Get an acknowledgement and commitment from the counterparty on the terms. And for simple negotiations, a verbal agreement will probably sufficient if it's a very simple discussion on a certain thing with a trustworthy colleague that you deal with all the time, right? But today, like we've said, anything, try to get it on paper. That always helps in the world of emails, and that is really important. Yes, Arunima, come here. Come in.
I have a question here. So
Yes.
when you've reached the end, once you've come to some sort of agreement,
Yeah.
and you're summarizing that, okay, these are the concessions I'm giving
Yeah.
you, this is what you're
Yeah.
giving me.
Yeah.
What if at that point the
Yeah.
counterparty kind of wants to use that opportunity to say that, oh, can you give me this as well? What if they try to again bargain for more concessions? What do
Correct.
you do?
See, everything depends on the situation, but
Hmm.
um, the first point that I'd like to share is not doing that will lead to more confusion, because this
Hmm.
same person could do it later on in a more advanced
Hmm.
stage, and
Correct.
that will lead to more confusion. Often it will be after a contract is signed or after the terms have dealt with, he'll bring up that point, which will lead to a lot of discussions post, right? So
Correct.
you just don't want to keep shut about terms and conditions praying that everything will be okay. In most business scenarios, they don't. I have made this mistake a lot myself in the past, right? When I used to negotiate and come with terms, I'll say, let's not talk about this thing. This is too uncomfortable. If we talk about this, then the client may kind of poke holes into this as well. Let's not talk about this, right? And let's get on with it. And then those issues would come up later. And then we would always
Hmm.
hope, saying, man, when we were striking the deal, we should have thought of all
Hmm.
these things, because now the client has brought in 10 other things, and the price that we've quoted doesn't commensurate our effort on these 10 other things that the client is says is in an area of gray that needs to be
Correct.
done. We may as well have put that down on paper, had that discussion right on the start. Now if somebody brings that up, they're saying that, oh, but this term, you're basically back to negotiating, right? It's nothing but you're
Correct.
back to negotiating, back to bargaining on that thing, and all the principles that we've discussed earlier come into play again, right?
Hmm.
Be
Hmm.
careful while giving the concessions. Give resistance on every concession. Don't give all the concessions at one time when you're doing it, right? So keep all those things. Don't just worry about the price, worry about all the other things connected to it. That's what you need to do. Have
Correct.
Batna, so you just get back to that same cycle which is there,
Got it.
right? Yeah, closing the negotiation, create to-do lists if needed for items to follow up on with clear deadlines. You can also send an email to the relevant stakeholders highlighting the terms agreed upon and ask the other party to acknowledge. I think in today's day and age, this is very, very important to do. In a lot of cases, your negotiation could possibly end in a legal agreement of sort, which is again very, very good. I think it's a very good practice to have a legal agreement, a contract sometimes between you and the other party. And that's very important because it just puts stuff into clarity and avoids a lot of confusion later, right? So, an email at least, but ideally a contract or a legal agreement around major stuff is what is really going to help. Okay, good. We're at the end of the session. What are your big takeaways? I hope you have at least 5 big takeaways from this session. Take these 5 big takeaways, take them to your coach, have a discussion with them on this thing. Um, Arunima is, of course, going to create exercises for you all, which you all will find in the learning resources. Am I right, Arunima?
Perhaps in the learning resources, or they will be shared with them during the live coaching session directly.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the two things will be done, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. I hope you enjoyed this session on negotiation strategies. We started off by saying it's impossible for us to cover it in 90 or even 120 minutes, but we've tried to kind of communicate certain key elements that can help you out in both your one-time negotiations and negotiations that are going to be more recurring. Right? Arunima, would
Swapnil,
you like
before
to?
you close, I have a
Yes.
question.
Yes, tell me.
One thing that we've not got into much detail about is deadlock.
Yeah.
So we've told people that go into a negotiation with your WAP, which is your walkaway price. So if it
Yes.
reaches that, if it goes beyond that, you just walk away from the situation.
Yes.
Unless of course unless you find another sort of a deal
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
What if you reach a situation where both you and your counterparty are kind of stuck at an element of the negotiation?
Mm,
I'm not sure if it could be that you've not quite touched your walkaway point yet, so you may not
mm.
want to step away from the deal altogether, or you may not, but you've reached a place where you can't go further
Yeah.
in that negotiation. So how do you handle that?
See, there's no one way of handling anything, right? Because there are thousand
Hmm.
different kinds of negotiation, thousand people involved. But let me just share two or three things that you possibly could do, right?
Sure.
One thing that you could do in those situations is take a break from that
Hmm.
discussion or negotiation that's happening,
Got it.
and just just cool things off a little bit at that point of time and say, you know what, and this is again, you've reached a point. If I'm a salesperson and you're in front of me in a B2B or B2C setting, I'll tell the person, negotiate, ensure that you close the deal and come back, right? Even if you have to
Correct.
compromise a little on the cost, if you have to compromise on all those things, do it, because closing that deal often is far more important than anything else for you.
Correct.
But you have painted out a situation where the sales guy or somebody else has reached a cost where he just cannot afford to do it, right, for that person. And you probably reached a deadlock around this, so then you can say, okay, you know what, this is the best we can do. However, let's take a break, let's have this discussion tomorrow, or let's have this discussion day after tomorrow, let's give it a couple of days and then get back to them, right? Because
Hmm.
often you're tired during discussions, ego problems happen during discussions, you want to
Correct.
be one up, and in 2 days, the mood could be slightly different around that issue, right? So that's one technique to use. Very often another technique to use if you're in corporate life is to involve your boss at that situation, right? So you
Got
say,
it.
okay, we've discussed this at our level and this is our deadlock that is there. Let's see if we can,
Hmm.
get our bosses involved and get them to talk about this situation, right?
Hmm.
So that's the other thing that you can do. And the third thing that I would suggest, if there's a deadlock, you say, okay, we deadlocked around this thing, right? Let's try to summarize on all the things that we agree upon
Hmm.
in this situation, right? And then in a lot of cases you realize that, you know what, we agree on just all these things. Is it worth kind of breaking this partnership or walking away from this deal based on this one term? So after you've summarized all the things that you agree upon, right, that builds that confidence that you say, okay, now what can we do around this thing that will whatever, right? You are
Isolation.
saying $1,000, I'm saying $1,500, I can't go below 1,500. If I keep 1,500, what else can I give you that will make this deal sweet, right? How else can I help you, right? So have again that mindset of trying to explore possibilities and having that open mind there around it,
Got it.
right? So for me, that open mind thing, everybody talks about it, having an open mind, but when it comes to negotiation skills, it becomes all the more important, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, guys. I hope you enjoyed this session. We enjoyed putting the content together for it. Yes, and I hope you have a lovely live online class with your coach on this particular session as well. It's going to be interesting. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.